Ojuelegba, CMS, Obalende,
Not again. This happens every single day. Why does it have to be like this every day?
Patricia, tell me this isn't true. You actually resigned? Patricia, we have 2 children, school fees to pay, house rent. How could you make a decision this big without talking to me first?
Permission? So that's what this is about. Not once have you stopped to ask me why I walked away.
Why I'm always the one leaving the office last. Why every promotion somehow skips my name.
We have to go back 3 years ago. Back to a woman the city had almost forgotten. There are women every great city quietly forgets. Women who leave home before the sun remembers to rise and return long after the street lights have accepted the night. They keep families together. They keep companies running. They solve problems they didn't create. They carry responsibilities no one ever notices until the day they can no longer carry them. Patricia was one of those women. For 20 years, she worked at one of the biggest commercial banks on Marina, Lagos Island. For 20 years, Patricia left home before sunrise, long before the hawkers claimed the bridge, so that Third Mainland Bridge wouldn't trap her in hours of traffic. By the time most people opened their eyes, she had already answered 3 customer complaints and apologized for 2 problems she didn't create. 20 years of balancing impossible targets, opening accounts, calming angry customers, and apologizing for network failures she had absolutely no control over. 20 years of believing that if she worked just a little harder, someone, somewhere would finally notice. But Lagos has a way of rewarding visibility before diligence. And every year, when promotion season arrived, Patricia was reminded of that truth. The promotion list would be pinned to the notice board. Staff gathered around it with nervous smiles and hopeful hearts. Patricia always searched for one name first, her own. It wasn't there. Every single year. This year, hot differently. Her line manager had spent months dropping little hints. Just be patient. Good things are coming. Management has noticed your consistency. For the first time in years, Patricia allowed herself to hope. Then the announcement came. The position she'd quietly prepared herself for went to a 28-year-old relationship manager who had been at the bank for barely 4 years. His qualifications went better. His results went stronger. But his uncle sat on the bank's board. Around the conference room, applause erupted. People stood to congratulate him. Patricia stood too. She smiled. She clapped. She even shook his hand. When the meeting ended, she didn't return to her desk. Instead, she walked slowly toward the emergency stairwell. It was an odd place to cry. Cold concrete walls, the faint hum of the building's generators vibrating through the floor. But years earlier, Patricia had discovered something about that staircase. One corner sat just outside the reach of the CCTV cameras. No curious colleagues, no forced smiles. Just enough privacy for disappointment to breathe. She stood there in silence, pressed one trembling hand against the wall, closed her eyes, and cried until heartbreak looked enough like exhaustion that no one would ask questions. Then she rinsed her face, straightened her blazer, reapplied her lipstick, and walked back into the banking hall, looking exactly like the dependable Patricia everyone expected her to be. She never told Mike, her husband, about days like this. She never told her children either. She convinced herself she was protecting them, but pain has a way of leaking through the smallest cracks. That evening, Patricia left the bank nearly 2 hours later than usual. Not because there was more work to finish, because she couldn't bring herself to drive home. She sat alone in her car, trapped in the slow-moving traffic crawling across Third Mainland Bridge, watching Lagos move around her while tears blurred the city lights into long streaks of gold. Cars honked. Downfall conductors shouted for passengers. Street hawkers weaved confidently between vehicles, balancing everything from bottled water to phone chargers on their heads. Life carried on. It always did, even when someone's world had quietly come apart. By the time she finally pulled into the compound, she had rehearsed her smile so many times that it almost looked convincing. Mike was already standing at the front door before she switched off the engine. He looked at his watch, then at her.
Patricia, where have you been? Tomiwa has been asking for you since 4 o'clock.
Mike, I told you I was in traffic.
I'm not accusing you, I'm just asking.
You're always just asking. Every single day, it's another question. Why are you late? Have you eaten? Are you okay? But have you ever asked why I'm always the one leaving the office last? Why every promotion somehow skips my name? You never ask those questions.
A stainless steel pot landed on the kitchen stove with a loud metallic bang that echoed through the house. Mike flinched, not because of the noise, because it wasn't really the pot she was throwing. It was another day of disappointment, another promotion she hadn't received, another piece of herself the bank had quietly taken without asking permission. That was becoming the rhythm of their marriage. Patricia would spend the entire day swallowing her frustrations, only to bring them home, still lodged in her chest. She snapped at her second daughter for leaving her school bag by the door. The same school bag that had sat there almost every afternoon for the past year. She barely touched her dinner. Instead, she sat scrolling through banking emails she wasn't even reading. Her thumb kept moving, not because there was anything important on the screen, but because looking at her phone was easier than looking at the people around the table. Then came the week everything nearly collapsed. David turned 9 that Wednesday. For weeks, he had reminded everyone in the house, "Mommy, you will come early, right?" She smiled every single time. "I promise." Not just a promise, she pinky promised. The kind of promise that means everything to a child, and far more than adults sometimes realize. Wednesday arrived. So did disaster. A major system update crashed several customer transactions across the branch. Lines stretched across the banking hall. Customers shouted. Phones rang without stopping. Managers barked instructions across departments. And time disappeared without her noticing. When Patricia finally looked at the clock, it was 8:40 p.m. For one long second, she forgot why that number mattered. Then she remembered. Her stomach dropped. She grabbed her handbag and drove home praying, not for traffic, but for one impossible miracle, that David would still be awake. He wasn't. The birthday balloon still floated above the dining table. Paper plates lay scattered beside a cake that had already been cut. One slice remained untouched, waiting for someone who never came. Mike sat alone in the parlor. He didn't raise his voice. Disappointment rarely needs volume. "David waited for you." His words were quiet. So quiet. They hurt even more. He kept saying, "Mommy said she's coming. Mommy said she's coming." Mike looked down at the empty plate in front of him. "Eventually, I had to lie. I told my own son, you called to apologize." He looked back at Patricia. "But you never called." Patricia opened her mouth. Nothing came out. There was no excuse big enough to carry that moment. She walked upstairs, sat quietly outside David's bedroom door. On the other side, she could hear the soft rhythm of her son's breathing. She rested her forehead against the wall, covered her mouth with both hands, and cried as silently as a mother knows how. Not because she was afraid of waking him, but because she wasn't sure she deserved to. 3 days after David's birthday, Patricia almost lost the only job keeping her family afloat. Exhaustion had finally caught up with her. That Wednesday afternoon, a customer came into the bank to send a large international transfer to a business partner overseas. Patricia processed the transaction the way she had done hundreds of times before. But that day, her mind wasn't fully there. She entered the wrong account details. It was a small typing mistake, just a few incorrect numbers, the kind of mistake anyone could make after weeks of running on stress, little sleep, and constant pressure. But in banking, small mistakes can have enormous consequences. The money was sent to the wrong account. By the time Patricia realized what had happened, the transaction had already been processed. Her heart dropped. For the next 2 days, the entire branch worked frantically to stop the transfer before the money disappeared completely. Emails flew between departments. Emergency calls were made to the receiving bank. Managers approved urgent requests. Everyone was trying to fix one mistake before it became a disaster. Thankfully, they recovered the money, but the damage had already been done. Not to the bank, to Patricia's reputation. Her branch manager called her into his office. He didn't shout. Some disappointments don't need raised voices. He folded his hands on the desk and looked at her for a long moment. Patricia, I don't know what is going on in your personal life, but whatever it is, you cannot bring it into this office. He slid the transaction report across the desk. This mistake could have cost the bank millions, and it could have cost you your job. Patricia nodded, apologized, and walked back to her car. She sat behind the steering wheel without turning on the engine. Employees drove past her one after another, eager to get home. She simply sat there, staring through the windscreen. Then, for the first time in months, she stopped pretending. She whispered 4 words that no one else was there to hear. Almost a whisper. I'm collapsing. Then the truth she had been running from finally found its voice. I'm actually collapsing, and nobody can see it. Patricia didn't know it then, but that quiet confession inside her car would become the turning point of her life. Because sometimes help arrives long before we realize we've been praying for it. And for Patricia, help came carrying a single box of belongings. Her name was Grace. Patricia thought she had given up on hiring house helps. The first one stole money from her handbag. The second slapped her daughter, denied it, and blamed the child. The third almost destroyed her marriage. Her name was Peace. One Saturday afternoon, Patricia came home earlier than expected after a network outage shut down operations at the bank. She walked into the kitchen and found Mike standing much too close to Peace. His hand rested on her waist. For a few long seconds, nobody moved. Mike quickly pulled away. Peace stepped back. The silence in that kitchen said more than words ever could. It was a mistake. It meant nothing. I crossed a line, but nothing else happened. Patricia wanted to believe him, not because she trusted him anymore, but because she looked at her children and couldn't bear the thought of tearing their family apart. So she chose to stay and forgive him. But forgiveness and forgetting are not the same thing. She forgave him, but the suspicion stayed. After Peace left, Patricia told herself she was done. No more maids, no more strangers living in her house. She would rather be exhausted than heartbroken again. Then one afternoon, her friend Nkechi called. Friendly, conversational tone from Nkechi. Patricia, I found someone. I found an agency you can trust. And they have a girl at the moment. The girl's name is Grace. Just give her a chance. If she doesn't work out, then you fire her and you will know that at least you tried. Patricia wasn't convinced, but she was running out of options. Her marriage felt fragile. Work was becoming unbearable. She was constantly tired, and the house was slowly becoming another full-time job. A week later, Grace arrived. She was 24 years old, She had traveled from Kaduna with just one medium-sized box, a small handbag, and a quiet smile. She wasn't loud. She wasn't overly friendly. She simply greeted everyone politely and asked where she should begin. The difference was almost immediate. Within the first 2 weeks, Grace had quietly transformed the rhythm of the house. She woke up before the alarm Patricia had set for her. By the time Patricia came downstairs each morning, David and Tomiwa were already bathed, dressed in their school uniforms, and eating breakfast. The kitchen was clean, lunch boxes were packed, school shoes were polished, and lined neatly by the door. She never touched anything that didn't belong to her, never raised her voice at the children, never argued or complained. And perhaps most importantly, she never gave Patricia a reason to doubt her around Mike. One evening, Patricia came home after another exhausting day at the bank. She expected the usual chaos. Cooking, ironing, helping with homework. Instead, she stopped at the living room door. Her work clothes were neatly ironed and hanging on the dining chair. Dinner was ready. The children were laughing over their homework. And in one corner of the sitting room, Grace was carefully mending a tear in one of Mike's trousers. Her fingers moved confidently through the fabric. Each stitch was so neat. It looked as though it had come from a sewing machine. Patricia picked up the trousers and turned them over in surprise. Grace? She smiled. Who taught you to sew like this?
My mother, Ma. I've been sewing since I was 11.
She paused. Her smile faded just a little.
I always dreamed of opening my own tailoring shop, but life had other plans. The sentence hung quietly in the room. Patricia didn't ask any more questions. That night, for the first time in almost a year, Patricia slept without placing her phone under her pillow. She slept through the night. No banking emails. No restless thoughts. No waking up every hour to check the time. Just sleep. Real sleep. The problems at the bank hadn't disappeared. The promotions still weren't coming. The pressure was still there. But something inside her home felt peaceful for the first time in a very long time. Patricia wasn't carrying everything by herself. And sometimes, having someone help carry the weight doesn't solve all your problems. It simply gives you enough strength to keep walking. 6 months passed. For the first time in years, Patricia's home no longer felt like another place she had to survive. Grace had become more than a house help. She had become part of the rhythm of the family. The children adored her and she ran the house smoothly. One Saturday morning, as Patricia watched Grace carefully mend one of David's school uniforms, she remembered something Grace had said months earlier. I've been sewing since I was 11. I've always dreamed of owning my own tailoring shop. Patricia looked at the neat stitches running across the fabric. The dream was still there. It had simply been waiting for someone to believe in it. That afternoon, Patricia drove to Balogun Market. After walking through rows of crowded shops, comparing prices and asking questions, she bought a simple manual sewing machine. It wasn't the biggest or the newest model, but it was sturdy. More importantly, it was a beginning. When she got home, she asked Grace to come into the sitting room. I have something for you. Grace looked at the covered box on the floor. Confused, she slowly pulled away the wrapping. The moment she saw the sewing machine, she froze. For a few seconds, she simply stared at it. Then tears filled her eyes. Not the polite tears people shed when they receive an unexpected gift. These came from somewhere much deeper. She covered her mouth with both hands. No! Her voice trembled. Nobody has ever trusted my dreams before. A tear rolled down her cheek. Nobody. It's just a sewing machine, Grace. No, Ma. This is hope. Grace gently ran her fingers across it, as though she were afraid it might disappear. For days, Grace could hardly stay away from it.
Every spare moment she had, she sat in the small room at the back of the house, practicing. And before long, the steady breathing of the sewing machine became part of the soundtrack of the home.
2 weeks later, Grace walked into the kitchen while Patricia was preparing breakfast. "Ma," she hesitated. "Can I make something for you?" Patricia looked up. "What do you want to make?" "A jacket. Just to see if I still remember everything my mother taught me." "Of course, I'll be your first customer." For the next few evenings, Grace walked quietly after everyone had gone to bed. She measured, cut fabric, removed stitches she wasn't satisfied with, started again. She refused to rush it. A week later, she knocked gently on Patricia's bedroom door. "Ma, it's ready." Patricia unfolded the jacket. It was elegant, simple, beautifully tailored. The fit hugged her shoulders perfectly. A strip of Ankara fabric ran neatly along the collar, giving it just enough character without being loud. She walked to the mirror. For a moment, she simply stared. She hardly recognized the woman looking back at her, not because the jacket had changed her, but because it reminded her what confidence looked like. The following Monday, Patricia wore it to work. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply liked the way it made her feel. She had barely settled at her desk when one colleague stopped beside her. "Patricia, this jacket is beautiful." A few minutes later, another colleague asked the same question. Then another. By lunchtime, people who had barely spoken to her in years were stopping by her desk just to admire it. Late that afternoon, Folake from the Western Union unit walked over. She gently touched the sleeve. "Patricia, where did you get this Maid?" "My relative made it." Folake, pleasantly surprised. "The one who stays with you?" Patricia, "She sews." Folake, immediately interested. "Can she make one for me? How much?" Patricia opened her mouth, then realized she had no idea what to charge. She thought for a moment. Not so cheap that people would doubt the quality. Not so expensive that they would walk away. It's 45,000 naira. The number surprised even her. Folake didn't bargain. She picked up her phone. "Send me your account number." Before the close of business that day, the money had already been transferred. When Patricia got home, she showed Grace the payment alert. Grace stared at the screen, then looked back at Patricia. "Someone actually paid for something I made?" Patricia smiles warmly. She handed her the phone. "Yes, someone paid. Because your work is worth it." A week later, Grace delivered the jacket. The stitching was flawless. The fitting was perfect. And without realizing it, Patricia had just made the first sale of a business that would one day change both their lives forever. Years later, Patricia would laugh whenever people called their success an overnight success. That's the part people always get wrong. There was nothing overnight about it. It grew one customer at a time. The first jacket led to 2 customers, not 20, just 2. Folake wore the jacket to a wedding in Surulere. Before leaving the reception, she snapped a few pictures, posted them on Facebook, and tagged Patricia instead of Grace. Grace didn't even have a social media page yet. The caption was simple. "My colleague's tailor is not playing." By the next morning, 2 women had commented beneath the post. "Please, who made this? Can I get her number?" Patricia smiled when Folake forwarded the messages. That made 3 customers, not 300. 3. And even then, Patricia wasn't sure what the work was worth. When one of the women asked for the price, Patricia hesitated before replying. 45,000 naira. The same amount she had charged Folake. The customer agreed immediately. For a brief moment, Patricia wondered if she had priced it too low. Business stayed quiet after that. No miraculous phone call changed everything overnight. Just steady growth. 5 customers became 8. 8 became 12.
every new order brought another referral. Someone wore Grace's jacket to church. Another wore hers to an office dinner. Then an engagement party. Little by little, Grace's work began speaking for itself. During the day, Patricia was still a banker. At night, she became Grace's manager. She took orders on WhatsApp during her lunch break and sometimes hid in the staff restroom just to reply to customers without interruption. She was living two completely different lives. Banker by day, business manager by every other spare minute she could find.
The turning point, it didn't come from a customer. It came from family. One Sunday after church, Patricia's cousin Ijoma came to visit. Ijoma ran a small skincare business online and understood something Patricia didn't. After scrolling through pictures of Grace's work on Patricia's phone, she frowned.
Patricia, what exactly are you people doing?
What do you mean?
Ijoma turns the phone toward her. These clothes are beautiful, but you're hiding them. She keeps scrolling. Where's the Instagram page? Patricia was silent. Where are the proper pictures? More silence. Why are customers sharing blurry screenshots instead of professional photos? You people are sitting on something big and treating it like an ordinary side hustle. That conversation stayed with Patricia all week. The following Saturday, she decided to change that. She created an Instagram page. She chose the business name herself, wrote the bio, asked Grace to model a few jackets, then turned a corner of her bedroom into a mini photo studio using a white bed sheet and natural sunlight. Her phone became the camera. The pictures weren't perfect. Neither were the captions. Patricia had never marketed anything before. She spent nights watching free videos online, learning how hashtags worked. She asked customers to tag the page whenever they wore their outfits. She reposted every review, answered every comment, replied to every direct message herself. Slowly, people began noticing. As demand increased, Patricia made another difficult decision.
She raised the price from 45,000 to 50,000 naira. She waited nervously. Maybe customers would complain. They didn't. Orders kept coming.
A few months later, she increased it again. 65,000 naira.
Still, people paid. Not because it was cheap. Because by then, Grace's craftsmanship had earned people's trust. Whenever people praised the business, Patricia always smiled at Grace first. Grace's talent was undeniable. Her hands created every beautiful outfit that left their home. But talent alone doesn't build a business. Grace built the product. Patricia built everything around it. Together, they turned a sewing machine into a company. They built something neither of them could have created alone. One evening, Patricia sat at the dining table with her notebook and calculator, adding up that month's sales. She checked the figures once, then again, then a third time. Finally, she looked up at Grace, who was quietly finishing another jacket across the room. The business had earned more that month than Patricia's salary after 20 years in banking. More than 550,000 naira. For the first time in a long time, Patricia allowed herself to imagine a life beyond the bank, which she had always believed was impossible. Within a year, the small boys' quarters behind the house could no longer contain the business. Rolls of fabric leaned against the walls. Finished jackets hung from every available hook. Boxes of buttons, zippers, and measuring tapes covered the tables. Some nights, Grace sewed until after midnight, only to wake again before 6 o'clock to prepare the children for school and keep the house running. Watching her one evening, Patricia realized something. This was no longer a side hustle. It was a real business. And it had outgrown both the boys' quarters and Grace. That night, over dinner, she made a decision. She looked across the table at Mike. "I'm resigning from the bank on Friday." Mike stopped eating. He slowly placed his fork on the plate. "You are doing what?" "I've made up my mind." He stared at her. "Have you even thought this through?" She nodded. "I've given that bank 20 years of my life. I miss my children's birthdays. I waited years for promotions that never came.
She takes a breath. This business has already earned more than my salary. I don't want to spend the next 20 years begging people to see my value.
Mike remained silent for a moment. Then he asked quietly, "And you didn't think we should make this decision together?" Mike continues, increasingly serious. "We have 3 children, school fees, rent, responsibilities. You can't just walk away from a stable job." Patricia met his eyes. "I wasn't asking for permission. I was telling you my decision." The room fell silent. Mike stood up, carried his plate to the sink, and without another word, walked upstairs. That Friday, Patricia resigned. Some colleagues thought she had lost her mind. Others quietly admitted they wished they had the courage to do the same. Leaving the bank changed everything. The business moved into a proper workspace off Allen Avenue. They hired 2 experienced tailors, then a pattern cutter. For the first time, Grace wasn't sewing every single piece herself. Their first full collection, modern Asoke jackets with contemporary cuts, sold out within 3 weeks. Customers began traveling from outside Lagos just to place orders. The business was growing faster than either woman had imagined. At home, something else was changing. Patricia was busier than ever. She left the house early for supplier meetings, returned late after customer fittings. Some evenings, she was still answering messages long after everyone had gone to bed. Mike watched it happen quietly. He wasn't angry at her success. He was proud of her. But somewhere along the way, he stopped knowing where he fit into her new life. The house no longer revolved around office schedules. Now it revolved around delivery dates, fabric suppliers, customer appointments, and production deadlines. Sometimes, Mike would sit alone in the living room while Patricia finished calls with her clients upstairs. One call became another, then another. Before either of them realized it, they had started living beside each other instead of with each other. It didn't happen all at once. Distance rarely does. It grows quietly. One missed conversation, one cancelled dinner, until one day you realize tomorrow has been happening for months. Mike missed his wife, not the businesswoman, not the entrepreneur everyone admired. Just Patricia, the woman who used to laugh with him over late night tea, the woman who noticed when he had a difficult day, the woman who once made their marriage feel like home. He never told her any of this. And Patricia never noticed how lonely he had become. She wasn't ignoring him. She was simply trying to keep everything else from falling apart. Neither of them realized the same thing. Success was saving their finances while quietly testing their marriage. And neither of them knew that the hardest conversation of their lives was still ahead. The breaking point came on a Friday night, 5 months after Patricia resigned from the bank. She was in the study, phone pressed between her shoulder and ear, trying to resolve a delay with a fabric supplier in Kano. The shipment was supposed to arrive the next morning. Without it, 15 customer orders would be delayed. She glanced at the time. She had promised Mike she would be off the phone by 7 p.m. It was already 7:40. She didn't even notice. Outside the study, the house was unusually quiet. Too quiet. Mike had just finished putting Tomiwa to bed. Their daughter had cried herself to sleep. Patricia had missed another ballet recital, the second one that term. Mike stood at the study door for a moment before speaking. Patricia. She held up one finger. Just 1 minute. He waited. Another minute passed. Then another. Finally, he walked into the room. Patricia. This time she looked up. What? I need you to end the call. She covered the phone with her hand. Mike, I'm sorting out a shipment from Kano. Can this wait 5 minutes? He shook his head. No, it can't. She sighed, apologized to the supplier and ended the call, then folded her arms. Okay, I'm listening. Mike looked at her for a long moment. When he finally spoke, His voice was calm. That frightened her more than shouting would have. Now, I see a woman who doesn't even have time for her own children. A woman who breaks promises and doesn't even realize she's breaking them. His eyes filled with disappointment. All you seem to care about now is customers, orders, Instagram, deadlines. He shook his head slowly. Everyone gets the best of you, Patricia, except your family. He looked toward the hallway where the children were sleeping. We are always the ones waiting for whatever is left. Patricia looked away. Mike continued. Tomiwa cried herself to sleep tonight. You promised you'd be at her ballet recital, but you weren't. Silence filled the room. Then Patricia spoke. So what do you want me to do? Close the business? Go back to that bank? Spend another 20 years waiting for people to decide whether I'm good enough or not? Not my wife back. The words landed heavily between them. I didn't marry a business. I married you. Patricia's own frustration finally spilled over. And I didn't build this business so I could spend the rest of my life apologizing for succeeding. Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched. Mike opened his mouth as though he wanted to say something else. Something he had carried for a long time. Instead, he closed it again. Finally, he nodded to himself. I don't know how much longer we can keep living like this. He turned and walked out. A few moments later, Patricia heard the guest room door close. It wasn't the first night he had slept there. For the past 3 weeks, it had quietly become another bedroom. That night, Patricia didn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, while the rest of the house drifted into silence. Her mind wandered back through the years. She saw David's 9th birthday, the untouched slice of cake, his disappointed little face. Then she saw Tumiwa. Twice now! She had promised to attend her ballet recital. Twice! Work had won. Slight shift, realization. Then her thoughts turned to Grace. Every interview request, Grace politely declined. Every opportunity, she redirected back to Patricia. Every time a customer called her simply Madame Stello. Meanwhile, every newspaper story carried Patricia's photograph. Every magazine called her the visionary. Every interview celebrated the banker who had built a fashion brand. Very few people even knew Grace's name. The thought unsettled her. Years earlier, she had cried in a bank stairwell because no one saw her worth. Now she found herself asking a painful question, quietly. Had she finally escaped that life? Or had she unknowingly created it for someone else? The room was silent, but this time, she didn't run from the question. She sat with it. By the time the first rays of morning sunlight slipped through the curtains, Patricia already knew what she had to do. The next morning, before the children woke up, Patricia asked Grace to meet her in the living room. Grace walked in quietly, her hands clasped together. Ma, did I do something wrong? Patricia smiled and shook her head. No. She slid a brown folder across the table. Open it. Grace carefully opened the folder. Inside were the company's registration documents and a shareholder agreement. She frowned. Ma, I don't understand. Patricia pointed to one line. Shareholder, Grace Musa, 40%. Grace looked at it, then looked back at Patricia. I've spent years calling you my house help. But the truth is, you've been building this business with me. You made every outfit. I built this brand around your talent. I've allowed the world to celebrate only my name. That ends today. She reached across the table and held Grace's hand. From today, you are no longer my staff. You are my partner. Grace stared at the papers. Then the tears came. Not because of the 40%, because for the first time in her life, someone had chosen to invest in her future instead of simply paying for her labor. Thank you, Ma. I'll never forget this. That evening, Patricia sat beside Mike. This time, she wasn't ready to argue. She was ready to listen. You are right. I built a business, but somewhere along the way, I stopped building my family. Mike was quiet. Then he sighed. I wasn't angry because you succeeded. I was afraid. I felt like I was losing you. Patricia reached for his hand. I'm here, and I don't want to lose us either. They talked for hours that night about the business, about the children, about the promises they had both broken. Before they went to bed, they made a few simple rules. No work during dinner. Sundays belonged to the family. And no success would ever be worth losing each other again. Months later, Mike left his law firm and joined the business as finance director. For the first time in years, they felt like a team again. 2 years later, the business had grown beyond anything they had imagined. Grace led the creative team. Patricia handled operations and marketing. Mike managed the finances. Their designs were worn by celebrities, business leaders, and brides across Nigeria. Orders began coming in from outside the country.
One afternoon, Grace stood on a stage in Milan, representing the brand as creative director and co-founder. From the audience, Patricia watched with tears in her eyes. She remembered the young woman who had arrived from Kaduna, carrying one box and a quiet dream. Then she remembered herself, the woman who had spent 20 years waiting for a bank to recognize her worth. In the end, recognition never came from the bank.
She built it herself, and the greatest investment she ever made wasn't in a sewing machine. It was in someone the world had overlooked. So, what do you think? Did Patricia do the right thing by giving Grace 40% of the company? Or should it have been an equal partnership from the very beginning? Let us know in the comments. Because sometimes the greatest investment you can ever make is believing in someone before the rest of the world does. And if stories like this interest you, subscribe to Niger Life Stories. Many more unforgettable stories are waiting for you. Thanks for watching.